All right, so just nod if you can see my slides, hand thumbs up or whatever. Okay, great. Research misconduct, there's me. So the learning objectives for this is to be able to identify the three types of research misconduct. What are, by federal regulation, recognized as the three types of research misconduct. Know how to report potential incidences of research misconduct, and also be able to just describe Baylor's research misconduct process in the barest terms, but just have an idea about what that is. So Baylor is required to, have research integrity programs, responsible conduct of research training programs, and so forth. And the reason why is because of the sheer fact that we receive federal funds that support research. So due to that, we're required to and implement policies and procedures for the reporting and responding to allegations of research misconduct, to providing federal agencies with the assurances necessary to permit the institutions to participate in federally supported research. These assurances are the things that get signed every time we accept an award. We're assuring that we have all of this in place. And then we're also required to have and implement these policies and procedures to protect the health and safety of the public, to promote the integrity of the research process, and to conserve and appropriately use public funds. Baylor investigates all allegations of research misconduct regardless of funding. The federal government only reviews and investigates allegations of research misconduct if there is federal funding involved. So for federally funded research, in particular for PHS, or most commonly known NIH funded research, it's the US DHHS Office of Research Integrity, and it's their website. They are the ones that are going to receive allegations, do inquiries, investigate, what have you. If it's NSF funded research, then that's going to be done by the NSF Office of the Inspector General. For DoD funded research, they don't have a single office. Each branch has their own investigative office. And so depending on whether you are being funded by the Office of Naval Research or the Army, then it depends on who is going to review any types of allegations of research misconduct. But in most cases, and this is written into the regulations, the federal agencies rely on the institution to conduct the investigation and to report back to the agency. And when we report back to them, they look at everything. They ask us for a ton of documents, basically the entire allegation file, the entire investigation file. They do a complete re-review of it, and then they make their own decisions based off of that. So what exactly is research misconduct? It is defined by federal regulation at 42 CFR 93 for the PHS and at 45 CFR 689 for the NSF. And research misconduct is defined as the fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in proposing, performing, or reviewing research, or in reporting research results. They define fabrication as making up data results and recording or reporting them. Falsification as the manipulation of research materials, equipment, or processes, or changing or omitting data or results such that the research is not accurately represented in the research record. Plagiarism as the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credit. Research misconduct is not honest error or differences of opinion. and it is not questionable research practices, which I'm going to touch on a little bit more in a few slides. A quick note on plagiarism. Plagiarism simply isn't not citing work. ORI does consider plagiarism to include both the theft and misappropriation of intellectual property, as well as the substantial unattributed textual copying of another's work. Plagiarism does not include any authorship or credit disputes. That goes back under the of what misconduct is not, being honest error or disputes. The theft or misappropriation of intellectual property includes the unauthorized use of ideas or unique methods obtained by privileged communication, such as that which is in a grant or manuscript review, or maybe a dissertation. Any of that, even if it's not published, if you have information due to a privileged position, then you can't use that without the appropriate crediting. Substantial unattributed textual copying of another's work means the unattributed verbatim or nearly verbatim copying of sentences and paragraphs, which may mislead the ordinary reader regarding the contributions of the author. I will note that ORI and NSF, they do not consider self-plagiarism as research misconduct. Self-plagiarism is also called text recycling. It's not misconduct, but it does tend to fall on the list of questionable research practices. But we have received allegations of self-plagiarism or text recycling in the past, and we've passed on those. So as well, where did that go? Okay. Research misconduct, fabrication, falsification, or plagiarism in the proposing, performing, or reviewing. So when we're looking at the proposing of research, we're looking at grant applications, failure to disclose COIs, misrepresenting credentials, be that on your CV or what have you. Any of that can be misconduct. Performing includes not following processes and protocols, or violating recruitment criteria. You know, fudging who could be in a research study because they're just below that research criteria is falsification. Reviewing includes misleading, or can include misleading authorship. Reporting doesn't just mean the publications. It can also include the data that's in manuscripts or theses, or data that's given to a mentor or a lab chief as representing the results of the experiment. So it doesn't have to be reported in a paper. It could be part of that. We also include in this list progress reports, continuing applications for an approved grant, or the preliminary data that's in a new grant application. Abstracts, posters, oral presentations, and preliminary reports are considered reporting as well. And data that's reported to central databases, such as multi-center clinical trials or epidemiological research, is reporting of results. And patent applications. Patent applications are generally not, necessarily considered public until they get to a certain point, or published, but they are considered the reporting of research results. So just the fact that there is falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism doesn't automatically mean that a research misconduct finding is made. It has to meet the 3 standards that are listed here. It has to be a significant departure from accepted practices of the related or relevant research community. It has to be committed intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. Each of those three have their own legal standards. Intentionally, of course, is with knowledge. Knowingly is, you should have known. It's something that would definitely be within your bandwidth to know that what is being done is misconduct. And then reckless is the lowest bar to meet on this list. And it could be, simply, sloppiness. You did the research very recklessly, and that could meet the bar. And then the allegation has to be proven by a preponderance of the evidence. This is another legal standard. This is the standard that's used in what we call civil trials. It's not a criminal standard, it's a civil standard. And so it basically means more likely than not. So the misconduct more likely than not occurred. And so it's kind of a 51%, 49%. So 51% it occurred, then it meets that preponderance of the evidence. So it's more likely than not to have occurred. Questionable research practices. So a questionable research practice in and of itself is not research misconduct, but it can lead to a slippery slope that ends in research misconduct. And several questionable research practices taken together can constitute research misconduct. Questionable research practices are actions that threaten the real or perceived integrity of the research and the researcher. And here's a list of what's commonly listed as questionable research practices, but it's by no means exhaustive. But things such as failing to maintain or retain raw data or other significant research data for a reasonable period. I can tell you that generally research misconduct looks back 7 years. But there is an opinion by ORI that even if research was done and published 20 years ago, if it's still being cited today, it falls within that 7-year realm. So if an allegation is made, we may have to look at that, and that would be going back like 20 years. And so it'd be great to still have the data from that time point. But I know it doesn't necessarily stay around that long. Other practices may be misrepresentation of data, such as suppression of relevant findings or data points, maybe omitting outliers, that type of thing. Conferring or requesting authorship on a basis of specialized service or contribution that is not significant. Refusing to give peers reasonable access to unique research materials or data that support published papers. This goes to reproducibility. Using inappropriate statistical or other methods of measurement to enhance the significance of research findings, text recycling or self-plagiarism, undisclosed duplicate publication, failure to disclose a COI, not observing legal and ethical requirements or obligations of care for human or animal subjects, biological substances, or the protection of the environment, and then neglective or exploitive supervision in research, such as mentoring malpractice. When we think about possible red flags that you may come across in conducting research or collaborating with people that are doing research, some possible red flags that research misconduct could be involved include things such as time, usable data are only generated when there's a pressing deadline, or experiments are completed faster than usual. We've had allegations in the past that are based on that on a thought that the individual could not have come up with the data that they got within the amount of time that they did. And we've had to go back through all of that data. Results, the data are just too good to be true. You just, might want to do another look at that type of data, or the findings can't be replicated by others in the lab. A note about replication, just because research can't be replicated doesn't necessarily mean that misconduct is involved. We have had research that can't be replicated that did involve research misconduct, and we've seen research that can't be replicated that did not involve research misconduct. We know that there's a lot of variables that go into an experiment, and they can't always be duplicated exactly every single time. But it could be a red flag of possible research misconduct, and is something that sometimes should be looked into, given other factors surrounding it. But just the inability to replicate research by itself is not a reason to find research misconduct. Other red flags include a lack of transparency. Raw data can't be produced when it's requested. Research materials and protocols are kept hidden. Work is mostly done when no one else is around. These are all factors that feed into other things by themselves. They're not necessarily research misconduct, but they could be a sign. There's been research into the risk factors of research misconduct and why research misconduct happens. And these are the main findings that we get from that research. At the top is going to be academic and career pressures. People are pressured to produce. They're pressured to get promotions, to get their degree in a certain amount of time, to give results to their funders and things like that. And that can lead to research misconduct. It can be individual psychology. Some people are just terrified of failing. They want to make certain people proud. They want to make their PI proud, or what have you. And that can be a risk factor into committing research misconduct. Lack of appropriate training and skills. This we commonly see with graduate students and junior faculty. And we also see with foreign researchers not being trained in the cultural differences in ethics. They've come to the United States for a PhD program, but all of their, other training has been at their original, their birth country, and it may have a different cultural ethics. And they need to be trained in what is acceptable in the US and what necessarily isn't, in order for them not to misstep. Poor data retention and management. This is a big risk factor in findings of misconduct. Proper retention of original preliminary or raw data is essential. And we also want to note that all data that is created while you're at Baylor belongs to Baylor. This includes lab notebooks. So if, a grad student, goes off, or a faculty member moves on, it's essential that that data gets left behind. That doesn't mean you can't take a copy with you, but the data does need to be retained by Baylor as well, because we have a responsibility, as well as ownership of IP and things like that are produced during an individual's time at Baylor. Insufficient supervision and mentoring is a risk factor in misconduct cases, especially with students. Inadequate knowledge kind of feeds into the other things, such as lack of appropriate training or skills, or maybe they're just working in an area that's new to them and they haven't had the requisite mentoring or the training that they needed. And then, as previously noted, questionable research practices are a factor in research misconduct as well. There are severe consequences of research misconduct. There's federal level consequences. There are also institutional consequences. At the federal level, we see retractions, corrections of publications. That's also seen at the institutional level. That can be something that the institution requires. But the federal agencies can fine, they can debar from federal funding for participation in federal programs like Medicare, if you're a physician or what have you. That can be from a couple of years up to a lifetime debarment. You can never receive federal funds for research. Again, that's within their power. You can also go to prison. It's not common, but people have gone to prison for research misconduct. Institutional actions can be probation, suspension, reduction of rank, dismissal from a program, from the school, or termination. If a student, I'll make a note here, if a student has already graduated, it can include revoking their degree. Baylor has done that in the past for research misconduct. Monitoring of future research activities is another action. Very specialized monitoring and supervision can be required. We can restrict people from conducting research, and faculty members included. You can be shifted completely to teaching and not be allowed to conduct research. As I have always said, research is a privilege. It's not a right. And so that is something action an institution can take. Removal of the responsible person from a particular project, and specialized retraining. We have in the past required some individuals to go to very specialized retraining in the responsible conduct of research outside of Baylor, and required that be paid for out of their own pocket. Research misconduct affects everybody at the institution, and it affects the academic community as a whole. For science to be trusted, it must have integrity. And so we rely on the community, including BU faculty, staff, students, and external academics, to report potential cases of misconduct to Baylor. We aren't out there looking for misconduct. We don't conduct random audits of data or interviews of research staff. We don't require papers to be run through plagiarism software before submitting to journals or otherwise publishing. That I have seen being required more and more at other institutions. The requirement that papers and grant proposals and so forth does get run through plagiarism software. I think that may be something that we're going to see more of, especially with AI in the mix. We've seen, at least on the research side, we've seen IRB protocols written with AI. Don't know if we've seen a research proposal written with AI yet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it happens. And I'm sure faculty members have seen papers written with AI or have at least suspected. So that's something that may happen in the future. But at the very least, I hope to be able to offer plagiarism software in the future for our faculty. It's a different type of software than Turnitin. It's called Authenticate, but we're working on that. But we do want anyone to contact us if there's anything that seems suspect, weird, hinky. I've never seen it done that way before. We're more than happy to talk about it. and make a decision about, how it should be handled. Not everything has to go through a formal research misconduct process. Some things don't require that, but it's good to talk about it, just so that we can address any potential issues, especially if we're looking at questionable research practices that aren't rising to that level of research misconduct yet. If we can nip things in the bud before they get to that stage, that's always our goal. Reports can be made confidentially to research compliance, to me, the research integrity officer, or they can be made confidentially or even anonymously through Ethics Point, which is Baylor's Report It system. If federal funding is involved, we are required to report any inquiries, investigations, and findings of misconduct to federal research sponsors. That is not something that we have a choice in. Baylor does have a policy on misconduct in research. That's a link to where it is. It's on our university policy page. And in general, we get our sources of allegations from a variety of places. We get them from either internal or external complaints that come straight to me. We get anonymous complaints through Ethics Points. On rare occasions, during some just standard monitoring and auditing, we may notice some anomalies that makes us ask questions, and on rare occasions, it's ended up going into a research misconduct process. Allegations, anyone can make allegations for federally funded research directly to the funding agency. That doesn't have to come through the institution. So the funding agency, if they receive an allegation, they'll reach out to us to start the misconduct review process. And then journals also will send on occasion some allegations if they think something is off as well. One thing we don't do is troll PubPeer, that's for sure, because people are very critical on or can be very critical on PubPeer. We don't troll that looking for complaints. This is our basic misconduct process for Baylor underneath our policy. When an allegation comes in, there is what's called an assessment period. And this is where I'm going to be evaluating that allegation to determine whether it falls within the scope of our research misconduct policy. And what that means, is it an allegation that involves falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism? If they're just calling because there's a dispute over something, or that type of thing, authorship is not research misconduct, it doesn't fall on any of those things, then it's not going to get past the assessment stage. We're just looking to see if the allegation falls underneath the scope of the research misconduct policy. We received allegations where it actually needed to go to academic integrity instead, because it involved a student, and it wasn't really research as well. If it falls underneath the scope, then we proceed to what's called an inquiry. And this is a more formal stage. This is where the respondent, who is the individual that the allegation's been made against, this is where the respondent gets notified that an allegation has been made and that we're looking into it. What I'm focusing on at this point is gathering information to determine whether there is sufficient evidence that can warrant an investigation. And that means that there's enough hard evidence that can support a committee looking at it to determine whether misconduct has happened or not. It's a relatively lower bar to meet. But there have been occasions where, you know, something gets kicked out at the inquiry stage. It's a no. It doesn't, there isn't enough evidence. The allegation itself is vague. We can't link it to any type of data. We can't link it to any type of specific research experiment or protocol or what have you. And therefore, we're not going to go on a fishing expedition and go through the faculty members, all of their research that they've done for the last 10 years to see if there's any research misconduct. We don't do witch hunts, we don't do fishing expeditions when it comes to research misconduct allegations. So at that stage, the respondent is told about it, a review is done, we may sequester information at that stage, and then a final report is made. The respondent has the ability to respond to that. And then a determination is made whether to proceed to investigation. If that's a yes, it goes to an investigation, and the vice provost for research appoints an ad hoc committee. At this stage, as the RIO, I'm available to the committee to help guide them through the process, but under no circumstance is the RIO making the finding of whether misconduct has happened or not. We are there to help them get information that they need, to go through the information, to help them write reports, and to advise them on the policy and maybe any legalities that are necessary. But the RIO is actually not a member of the committee and does not make the finding of misconduct or not. We usually institute a committee of at least 3 individuals, sometimes more, depending on the expertise that's needed. We try, it may be all internal, it may include external members, depending on the circumstances. So there's no hard and fast rules about who is on the committee, but we do try to establish a fair balance of individuals. The committee is the one that will interview individuals and go through all of that review. And they will ultimately issue a final report with its determinations of whether research misconduct did occur, whether there was honest error and therefore it's not research misconduct as well. The final report with its determinations and also any recommended administrative actions then goes to the deciding official. And it's the deciding official that will review the final report and make the determination of whether to accept the report. If they accept the report, that means that they're concurring with the committee, research misconduct did occur, and then any administrative actions at that point will be levied. If the deciding official doesn't accept the report, it usually will go back down to the investigative committee for them to maybe re-review the deciding official's comments and go forward from there. They may issue a new final report at that stage. But I've never had an instance where the deciding official has not accepted a report. And in all of my discussions with people in the research integrity officer community, it's extremely rare that that has ever happened. The investigation committee may make administrative action recommendations and that's one of the things that they're allowed to do. It's up to the deciding official whether to accept those, whether to put those in practice, or the deciding official may actually decide to take further actions than what the committee has recommended. So I wanted to provide an opportunity for discussion. And so if you think about the risk factors or the causes of misconduct, which do you think are some of the most important? What are your thoughts on what can be done to decrease the risk to like students and to faculty members, given those risk factors? And what are some strategies that you think may be used to prevent research misconduct?
I think it's just an overall, and we've talked about this on the IRB, Deb, is just mentoring, and it's kind of hard to prove, well, you didn't seem to mentor your student. You don't want to always make that accusation, but as you know, there seems to be with a lot of us an increasing frequency of students on the IRB, proposals, which is great, but a lot of times it's like, why didn't the professor catch this? So I'm not sure how to really mandate. I mean, obviously they're mentors signing it, but it's like when you take a look, like, ooh, this is like pretty glaring. So I'm not sure if we can do these workshops for the mentors and say, please actually catch these kind of things with the student. I don't know. We do that, but it seems it's becoming a problem, not only with the research misconduct, but like just writing and just everything. It's like, no, that's not what a control group it is. So, IRB members seem to be increasingly have to, mentor the students indirectly.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
I agree with that. I'm sorry I had my camera off. I'm having some Zoom difficulties today.
All right.
So I apologize for that. My name is Sarah Meyer and I'm in educational psychology. And I think that Paul has an excellent point about mentorship for the mentors as well. And so some education for the mentors. Even as I was listening to the presentation today, which is super detailed, it's very helpful. And I'm thinking to myself, I want my research team to watch this recording and to have the opportunity to really understand the implications and the seriousness of how we conduct our research and being ethical and the implications for all of that. And so I know that that personally, as a person who is mentoring student researchers and emerging scholars, I would highly value any opportunities to share these resources or to attend additional trainings myself, just to make sure that we can do exactly what Paul is saying, which is to make sure that not only are we doing a good job in our own research, but that we're mentoring our future generations of researchers to really do an outstanding job as they come out of Baylor with a PhD.
Right. Yeah. No, we're always available.
Yeah, that's a great comment, Sarah. This is Virginia Kearney. I just was thinking how it would be very helpful if there is, I know they're thinking about having something like this be more mandatory for the graduate students. I'm thinking especially graduate students that this one, and then the responsible authorship, I really learned, well, on all of the different RCR trainings, I've learned a lot, but especially on these, I think that this is information. There's just a lot of information here, and I'm sure that the mentors are conveying it, but they're not sitting down generally, I think, and doing a full discussion, maybe with back and forth with the students, and maybe even a situation where there would be some case studies that students could go through and think through. I think that would be very useful. To me, it's a very, this is a strong argument for the fact that students need to be having some mandatory classes on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So there is evidence that potential misconduct is underreported. I don't think that that's surprising to anybody. What do you think hinders reporting for report for the most part. You know, me as a compliance professional for 20 years, I don't have a problem making a report about anything. But
Someone, yeah,
for most people, what do you think hinders reporting? Or
someone
even
has
just
to
picking up
catch
the
it.
phone? Yeah.
Someone has to catch it, for, for instance, with the self plagiarism, like you said, the IRB does not necessarily call that research misconduct. I can tell you that the journals will. So, I mean, they do, like, publicly. And so it's, I mean, publicly meaning in the review, so they do sort of bring up these sort of issues with the self plagiarism. So it's just which monkey on the ladder is actually catching this? Is it the mentor, hopefully, or the committee? I'm on the comms committee for a PhD student who is not my student, and so we read the comms papers, and because we're not intimately knowledgeable with that student's work, we kind of have fresh eyes to kind of question things, nicely. Like, is that referenced appropriately, or is that really true, or is, what I mean? So we can question. So somebody has to catch it, and so often with like falsification or those kind of things, sadly, until the journal sees it, nobody catches it in many cases, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's definitely also out there there's a fear of retaliation, obviously, that I think hinders a lot of reporting. That's why we do like to offer the anonymous aspect of ethics point, although in the research misconduct proceedings, if we're acting off an anonymous report, that means we can't let the person who reported know what the ultimate action is, because not everything becomes public. Only if something is federally funded, goes to the agency, and the agency actually takes action against that individual, will a public report happen about research misconduct. So there's a lot of misconduct findings out there in the US that we never hear about, just because of the confidentiality issues, and because you don't necessarily want to ruin somebody's career for a single mistake and things like that. So there's a lot of psychology that goes into hindering reporting as well. The retaliation, the not wanting to upset somebody if they found out that you spoke to somebody, and that type of thing. We do try to do our best to protect people as much as possible. Baylor does have a whistleblower policy. Retaliation itself within a misconduct case can be misconduct if a person is being the person who made the complaint is being retaliated against during the misconduct case because of their complaint. That also becomes part of the misconduct as well, and can lead to harsher actions. So we do understand that there are those issues, and we'll try to help anyone that wants to report as much as possible. So do you agree, and this is a question that's come up recently, because right now the Office of Research Integrity is making changes to the current regulations on research misconduct. And so what is research misconduct has come up in the community. So do you agree with that definition that it is, just falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism? Do you think it should include other misbehaviors? And if so, what should those misbehaviors necessarily be?
I'm not sure, but like I mentioned, there were two of them that you mentioned. I'm not sure the second one. Like I said, the first one was the self plagiarism that absolutely I would say I've heard or been told that journals would consider that misconduct. Not that, that means the IRB has to, but I think it could be the higher, standard. I mean for sure. So it's different. They're worried about publication, but journals tend to be a little skittish because they don't want any kind of publicity, because anything that's out there that they let out there is public immediately. So
Right.
at the university, it doesn't necessarily have to be public. It can be anonymous, and we handle it here. But so I'm not sure that others should be added, but just to be aware, maybe to mention in the trainings to the students, this is just a minimum, but just be aware that journalists could hold you to a higher standard.
Mhm. I'll note that, even though they're not considered misconduct because they don't rise to falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism, there is a push to recognize other misbehaviors that do affect scientific integrity, such as harassment and bullying and discrimination, and those. And while we don't necessarily address those through the research misconduct process, Baylor does have other avenues of addressing those misbehaviors. And in some cases, especially with harassment and in some cases, discrimination, if an institution makes a finding and it's related to federally funded research, we're required to report that finding as well. For those types of misbehaviors. So I don't know if the research misconduct regulation itself is going to be expanded beyond falsification, fabrication, or plagiarism, but there is a push and the willingness to identify other misbehaviors that can affect scientific integrity, and to require institutions to start addressing those as well.
I think it's an overarching issue with not only this, but just graduate students, just being taught one thing in school, but there's a higher standard in journals, that somebody has to make them aware, of that. So hopefully it's the mentor, but they don't always see that till they get out and they try to publish.
Right. So that's the end of the slides. There's some references. You can definitely have access to these slides. If you are looking for some tools for students, I highly recommend the infographics that are available on the Office of Research Integrity website. They've got a large list of them, and they're great infographics, and they can be printed off and posted in labs, and what have you as well. But does anybody have any questions? No? Yes, no? Well, I hope that was helpful. And if you do have any questions, or want to talk about anything, please feel free to contact me through my email or by my phone or what have you, or even stop by the office when I'm in there occasionally.
This was great, Deborah. Thank you.
It
All
was
right,
really
thanks.
very
Thank you,
helpful.
Deb.
Bye.
Everybody, thanks.